Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Vibhuti Jha. And, as we always do, one of my ambitions always is to dive into an issue and talk about its impact and implications, because that's the most important, valuable lesson I have learned in my life. Everything that happens around us makes an impact and has an implication for someone or somebody. Heard about the butterfly effect? And everything that is there around us. So, a tsunami somewhere affects the oil prices somewhere else. So, those things are very important to attend to. So that's what I'm talking to you about today. Is the first Quad summit, Indo-Pacific Treaty, just is happening. Is a big thing to happen. A digital conference happened between four major democratic countries in the world: India, US, Australia, and Japan. And it is primarily talking about Indo Pacific to provide what, Prime Minister said, stability and hope to people in that region. Is it anti China? There has been a conversation about this for a very long time, the China containment policy that India is being propped up in the Pacific region, in the Asian community, to counter China. People have been denying it. But that's the geopolitical reality. This issue in the Indo Pacific Quad Summit, Quadrilateral Summit, plus the issue of corporate productivity, employee productivity, which is key in a post coronavirus world. The work culture, work pattern has changed completely. How do we discuss that part of it? So we will talk about these two very important subject matter with a very dear friend of mine, Abhijit, Iyer, Mitra, a fabulous combination of Tamil, Bengali, genetic disposition. And Abhijit, welcome to my show. And I would sincerely hope that we will have many more things to talk about. And as a result of which, in one conversation is never enough. So given your presence, geopolitical presence, you are very popular on Indian television and you do a lot of shows and you have amazing sense of humor. So, share with us all your diversities with specific reference to Indo-Pacific Treaty and the conference or the summit that has been recently held in a digital way. That's also very important. Go ahead, Abhijit.
Vetrivel, and thank you for having me on Vibhuti Ji. So, getting to the Quad, remember the nature of containment has moved on since the Cold War. In the Cold War, you had this thing. There was an absolute trade embargo of sorts on the Soviet Union and its allies. You couldn't fly between. I mean, the flights were heavily restricted. Trade was heavily restricted, monitored, and whatnot, and things like that. And from there, we've moved to something called engagement, which is to both contain and engage at the same time, which is what we claim, or at least that's what the free world claims it is doing with China. The problem is with the engagement part, given China's massive reserves and the as dollar reserves and the massive size of the Chinese market, it also has a deeply corrupting influence. And that is something we tend to ignore. Now, I remember being at the Munich Security Conference in, what was it, 2013, 2014, something like that. And I remember the thing that they were saying was there was a big session on, because Berlusconi, who is very famous for his bunga bunga parties, I'm not going to go into what those bunga bunga parties were, I think everybody knows, was compromised because of his business dealings with Russia. Now, the problem is, for every man who has business dealings with Russia, I can show you 100 more who have business dealings with China and their motives aren't questioned. They aren't subject to counterintelligence scans. Biden's own son is compromised to China, and we don't know what happened to that FBI inquiry after Biden took over. There's no more talk about it. Nobody's reporting about it, nothing. And that was very serious because if you remember, Ro Khanna, who is the congressman from California, acknowledged that the person who blew the whistle on Hunter Biden was in fact a Democrat well-wisher who had no other option except to go to Fox News because nobody else would carry the story, right? So you have this set of things, this movement to engagement, and the corruptive influence of China. Let's keep this in the background. What has happened with the Quad is that when you engage with a country, especially a country which you fought a war with that just killed your soldiers last year, you need to have two things. You need to have carrots and you need to have sticks. Carrots, we're one of China's biggest trade partners, $90 billion and counting. It's a very colonial nature of trade. We export mostly raw materials to them and we import finished goods from them, much like we used to with, excuse me, with Britain when we were colonized by them. But whatever it is, our IT infrastructure and economy depend on that trade in a sense. Agreed. Where is your stick? Their defense budget is something like 4 to 5 times your defense budget. They are way ahead of you in per capita income, in human development, in technology, even. And your only way of countering that is to ally with a whole bunch of people, pool your energies. To give our viewers a very simple example, I just want your viewers to look at my hands. See soft, pudgy, fat, chubby hands. They've never done a single day's worth of honest work in their lives. Okay, these are softer than your wife, your daughter's hands. Most people tell me they've never seen softer hands. Now, if I want to bash up somebody, obviously I can't do it. I'll get beaten black and blue. Heck, the girls in my class used to beat me up black and blue. So what happens is I have to find 2 or 3 street thugs, gundas, whatever. My brains, their brawn, whatever. You bring your best to the table and you counter them jointly. This is why we need the Quad. And that has always been the center of the Quad. The problem with the Quad is it's always been a very fraught relationship. Now, three of these countries, Japan, Australia, and America, have a very similar economy, all developed countries. They also have a very similar military. They're all completely intercompatible. If you tell them to go fight together, they don't even need drills or things like that. They just know each other's procedures. The standard operating procedures are the same. The equipment is all intercompatible. The weapons are all intercompatible, so they can fight. uh, they can do it as if they're reading each other's thoughts
Right.
almost. India is not like that. The economy is different. Our military is completely different. Heck, most parts of our military can't even talk to itself. They even don't talk to somebody else. You saw during the Balakot standoff, we shot down one of our own helicopters because it's IFF. It's called the interrogator friend of foe was turned off. Now, in addition to this, you have friction between the partners out there. If you remember when Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister of Australia, he first of all he cancelled the nuclear deal between India and Australia that John Howard had negotiated. Then within weeks of that, he goes stands in Beijing side by side, hand to hand with the Chinese premier, and he says we're pulling out of the Quad. And India took that very, very badly. And, we punished Australia for a very long time and we've let Australia back after a very long time back into the Quad proper. This was number one. Number two, I'm not going to go into India, USA. We all know what the issues there are or non issues as the case may be. Japan and America, people don't realize this because, people tend to view the English press, the English commentariat is so Eurocentric. We only look at Europe's assessment of an alliance. We don't look at what Asia or the Middle East is thinking. If you talk to people in the Middle East or in East Asia, they'll tell you Trump was the best thing that happened. Why? Because if you remember, when Biden was vice president under the Obama administration, the issue of the Senkaku Islands, the Diaoyu as the Chinese call them, flared up. And what happened over the Senkaku Islands was first, China stopped rare earth exports to Japan, which was fine, which was expected. Japan overcame it. But what was not expected was the Obama administration saying our mutual defense arrangement is limited to if there is an attack on Japan, implying that if it is disputed territory like the Senkakus are, an attack doesn't may not count as an attack. So he sort of undermined that alliance as well. So, Japan has some very bad memories of Obama. So you have a history of letting each other down out here. It's a very tendentious sort of, um, not tendentious, a tenuous alliance at best. And unfortunately, the actions of Biden within the first week of taking office, suspending F 35 sales to the UAE, removing the Houthis from the terror list, going out of his way to appease Iran, they don't give you much confidence at all.
That's a very powerful opening on that. However, is there are always some driving force to do something. Like they say that opposite poles attract. That's a famous statement that says. So even though I'm totally with you on this matter that the only reason that America will deal with India is to use the mortgage banking crisis. Just the banks were too big to fail. India is too big to be ignored, and so it is too big to be ignored at the moment in the cyclical or clockwork. As the saying goes, India is now important. And thanks to Prime Minister Modi for that, in my humble opinion, that he has created a relevance for India because and I know the whole world knows that India is not even a conversation piece in American media. It
Exactly.
is just an afterthought. Oh shit, it's that country is standing there. Let's talk about something nice about it, right? It is a fellow democracy, strategic alliance, and all the mumbo jumbo that goes about it. However, Prime Minister Modi has created a relevance for India that I believe that just as एक म्यान में दो तलवारें नहीं रह सकती हैं, right? So China considers India as the second sword, trying to dominate the Asian playground, where China can easily survive Japanese economic might because they know they can overrun militarily. Taiwan, all these Asian countries are no match to China. The only country China cares or worries about is these crazy Indians, the peace-loving, non-violent Indians. They make them circumspect. That's why there is a belligerence in China's behavior with reference to India. But there are many significant statements made. The statement which Morrison said, something very, very interesting, that the shape of the destiny of the world in 21st century, with inclusivity, with many nations in the region, is going to happen. Now, that is important. The shape of the 21st century will happen with many nations in the region coming into the Quad setup. So that's very powerful. Definitely, China experience is terrible for everybody. I don't think anybody likes China. Let's put it this way. Because of their killer contracts and the sheer domination of their communist ideology, nobody likes that. People
Right.
are looking up to alternatives. United Nations is not. BRICS is not, because China subverts each of these. This is one such element where China is not present. Thus, does it become an independent entity despite many side deals that happen between Hunter Biden and China? What the relationship will be? Your thoughts on that?
So, I'm going to disagree with you slightly on this.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I don't agree that India is too big to be ignored. We're already seeing this with, the increasingly negative press coverage. The notion that population determines its importance was probably important in a pre industrial age where manpower was the determinant of wealth, manpower and arable land. But in an industrial or post industrial setup, it's human capital that determines your impact. Why is it, for example, nobody talks about, say, Bangladesh or Indonesia, which are what, about 160 million people and 250 million people? But everybody wants to talk about Israel, which is what, 6, 7 million people, right? Even here in the Quad, we have to understand Australia and India are really footnotes. India is important because it sticks out into the ocean. So it has geographic salience in that sense. And it's a fairly big market. But if you look at the propensity to consume of the market, it's less than Germany, significantly less than Germany,
Right.
probably significantly less than Italy as well, because that top percent, which actually has European consumption levels, is less than 1% of your population, pretty much. So, point something percent of the population. So your economic salience isn't that great, which is probably why we remain a footnote in American or even UK discourses. Nobody really talks about India. I can tell you in Australia, nobody talks about India. In France, in Germany, in Italy, unless we hold the Marines hostage like we did, the Marines case, we're never the subject of an Italian TV
That's
debate.
right. We are not. We are not.
So India's visibility for all our belief in our self importance is almost non existent.
Right.
And unfortunately, after those big reforms that PV Narasimha Rao did, God bless his soul, and the sort of buttressing work that Vajpayee ji did, we've not really seen the neck, we've skipped 2, 3 generations of reforms that should have seen
Right.
us getting industrialized.
Mhm.
That has not happened.
Right.
So our importance isn't that great. Australia gets its importance from a totally different this thing. One is geographic, but the second is that it's a white Saudi Arabia in that sense. It also has high human capital, which I'm
Right.
not getting into, but it is a source of such great mineral wealth. China really can't do without it. The very curious thing that I noticed, because I've spent a lot of time in China, I spent a whole year doing research out there as well, traveling deep into the interior. India's visibility in China is non existent pretty much, even in military circles. They keep talking about Japan, they talk a lot about Taiwan, South Korea somewhat. India is again a footnote. They don't really care too much about India because they don't see themselves as our equals. We're more like that irritating mosquito that keeps going on that you need to
The famous
swat.
gadfly. The famous
The
gadfly.
famous gadfly. The person who really scares them I've seen other than America is Japan. And for a very good reason. Remember, Japan and Taiwan, despite their small size, they have extremely potent militaries. Very, very potent militaries, a huge amount of hitting power, and they have the luxury of an ocean between them. And even something as small as the English Channel was enough to stop Hitler. It was enough to stop Napoleon. uh, the Taiwan Straits and the Sea of Japan are much, much bigger and they're much more problematic. If you remember, the word kamikaze itself, comes from when the Mongol fleets tried to invade. Kubla Khan's fleets tried to invade Japan, and they got wiped out by the kamikaze
Right.
winds. So it's always been a step too far for China. Japan has managed to conquer China several times. China has never managed to conquer Japan. Historical sore spot.
No, that's very very correct. You have clearly said that the Japanese are not weak people. They are very determined people. They have no raw material. They suffer from all the earthquakes from time to time, but those people rise up. They have risen from Hiroshima. So you have got to admire them. I mean, so that is very very correct. However, on the India side, I would say, being having been one of the promoters, I belong to a band of a few good men, as I say, to borrow Tom Cruise's movie's title, belong to a band of a few good men who brought the India liberalization story here. And we achieved some success. And that's the time when I realized that how undersold we are, how inconsequential we are. So much so that many Americans used to ask me, "Are you a Pakistani?" I used to tell them, "Oh no, we are the good guys."
See, the selling aspect.
Yeah,
This is something I feel very, very acutely. Because, see, sales isn't just about, unfortunately, it requires a sustained whole of government effort, right? It's good people like you. It's it's how Indian Americans play the political basket, not being seen as a captive electorate for one party, willing to switch votes based on your dealing with the homeland, which Indians, their tendency to get absorbed and assimilated into a population actually goes against that, because Indians are one of those few communities that don't ghettoize in America. They're at the very top of the economic ladder, and increasingly they tend to be quite woke. You also find that the most stringent criticism of India actually comes from the Indian community
Right.
out rather
Absolutely.
than
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and very frequently clueless criticism. There is informed criticism and then there's clueless criticism. Mostly what you see is uninformed criticism. The third thing is the Indian government itself. You can't run a diplomatic outreach of a country of 1.3 billion people with fewer diplomats than Singapore has,
Right.
right? And that to underpaid diplomats, underfunded diplomats, undertrained diplomats who pretty much come there for the thrill of the foreign posting, so to say, have no people skills. I actually have a diplomat who called my friend out in Italy for lunch to a McDonald's. Uh, I kid you not. I kid you not. She was called out to a McDonald's by an Indian diplomat. And you're thinking, this is not how you schmooze and wine and dine people and get them to start spilling secrets. Uh, it has to be done with a great deal of sophistication. We don't even have that institutional handover of memory. We don't have institutional efforts. Things change when governments come. It's so bad, in fact, that governments don't need to come and go. Ambassadors themselves can completely overturn an approach or come up with a new approach and things like that. There is no continuity in any of this. So a sales pitch is a combination of several different things, and we're so lacking in a lot of things. The most important, because the diaspora is the one thing that acts as a cushion against governmental inaction or incompetence back home. The problem with the diaspora is that ever since Modi gave his na khaunga na khane dunga speech, what he essentially did was he replaced the old elites. He bypassed them. And you have a great body of malcontents that are trying to stir up all these narratives about India. And because of their connections, because they were the old elite, they're able to do that very successfully. And the problem is na khane dunga bit, because Modi hasn't replaced them with new elites, right? And when you don't replace the old elite with a new elite, you have a vacuum, you have a narrative vacuum, you have a sales vacuum, you generally have a PR vacuum. And that is really telling, because the few people who have made it to the new elite, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, they're really something of a sad, pathetic joke. Most people come out of meetings with them, uh, the elites believe laughing with them. They don't realize they're being laughed at, not laughed with.
You made very profound observations, because these are my own experiences firsthand on the battlefield. Because when I came here in 91, I received literally no support from any government organization. On the contrary, because I was working for a foreign bank, the government used to think that, oh, these fellows are foreign bankers, they are traitors to the nation. This is a sad reflection. There are so many stories I can tell you that it baffles you as an Indian. I worked for Reserve Bank of India, and I left that place because I didn't want to be part of the Gade Gode Ek Saman promotion policy. Like, you get into line when your senior dies or retires that your number comes in the next count. I didn't belong to that band of people. So I left.
Quick interjection, just
Sure,
a quick side note.
sure.
What's absolutely amazing about this is how well the Pakistanis play a weak hand. Every time I land up in DC, they somehow seem to know, because I'm speaking at some conference or another. The defense attaché will walk up to me and say, "Arey Abhijit साहब आप कैसे हैं? आपको टीवी पे देखा है, ये है, कभी आकर हमारे घर पे खाइए, lunch खाइए, this and that." Your own embassy doesn't give a damn.
Right.
Your own embassy, unless you say something nasty about them and they hear about it in the newspapers the next day, when they start sending your employer nasty notes, they don't even have the guts to come talk to you to your face. Uh, the Pakistanis are so proactive. They're there everywhere. They intervene everywhere. They make friends everywhere. And this is why they're such a potent force on the hill.
Oh, that's the whole point. This is what I'm trying to say to you, is that somewhere along the line, the Indian narrative sucks, to put it mildly. It does suck, and we have not done a good job out of that. And you made a very pertinent point that most of the disgust that complaint that comes from NRIs. As I was told, the famous story about 370 and CAA resolutions. I was told by a congressman, hey, we you do whatever you do in your country. We don't care because we do things because what suits us. You did something for your own country, but it's your own people who don't like Modi, who don't like BJP, are anti-Modi, anti-BJP. They become anti-country and they force us that you support us for anti-India resolutions. What can we do about it? But you will be very happy to know that here in New York, day before yesterday, uh, we successfully stalled and finished the entire agenda in which they were going to declare swastik as a hate symbol to be taught in schools. And with the help of some Jay Jacobs, a Democratic chair from Nassau County and Suffolk County, he declared in our Zoom meeting, he said that this bill is finished, it's not going anywhere. So, bill number 2727, incidentally, total nine, worked for India. So, that's the interesting part. And we stalled it. But we have to
Mind you,
now
it was
ready.
people like you doing it.
No, no,
It
it's a
wasn't the
teamwork.
government of
There were
India doing
several other people involved. I was also fortunately part of that entire process. We all played a role. It was a great team effort. This was one moment where if Om did not unite in Hindus, swastik did, because it also cut across the barriers of Jains. You know, ये मेरे लिए नहीं है उसका है. You know, like that kind of a thing. मेरा मामला नहीं है उसका मामला है. It's something like once a Keralite once told me. It's a very crazy thing. Keralite once told me, "Why do we care for Kashmir? Let's give it to Pakistan." I said, "No, I would rather give Kerala to Pakistan. You at least I will have navy presence to control it. You know, you don't matter. You are a tiny state. Kashmir is like the head there. So we want to keep that. We don't want to destroy our. That is the kind of attitude that exists. Ye mera problem nahi hai. You are totally right about that. And diplomatically speaking, somewhere along the line, you are absolutely on the money with reference to the fact that the ability of the foreign service is remarkably restricted. हमने तो कितने लोगों को कहा है कि भाई आप नोट सबमिट करो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया को कि why can't we create New York, many New
exactly.
Yorks in India? But
Yeah.
there is nothing happening on the proactive basis on that side. They all come, they are very nice people. I have got along very famously well with many of them, but in effectively, the action is few and far between. And you are absolutely right. The Pakistanis, they, however napaki they may be, they are more proactive with reference to their anti-India agenda. Rest of them, they suck. But so far as anti-India is concerned, we are remarkably active. They are very remarkably active. But that brings me to one of the important elements, post-coronavirus thing, a conversation about how does India become an economic mighty giant? You know that because you know that this is the first time a prime minister made a statement that private sector matters. We don't need to be in the business of business. These things, defense collaborations, these are happening. How much time will it take? Because we need a transformational shift. We don't need an incremental push. Okay, you know, that is the bane of our country. And I have talked about this many times. What India needs is a transformational shift, not an incrementalism. Will it happen? Is it, are we moving in that direction? Considering the fact, I have always said this, what happened to Trump in 2020, an unusual president, very effective in his own way. The left liberal, what we call on Jaipur Dialogue, the Panch Makkars, are going to brand everything Modi will try to change as the human rights violation part of it.
Right.
What can India do to claim with America, shut up and don't interfere? What do we need to do?
So, see, there's three different aspects out here. Number one is Modi, and this is the good part. Modi has learned from Vajpayee ji and from Narsimha Rao ji. Because remember, Narsimha Rao and Vajpayee were in very different ways, very transformative people. And they paid for that transformative effect by losing elections. And he's very clear that he's not going to lose those elections. So, what we're seeing, thankfully, in the second term, I was very skeptical because the first term was a complete wasted term. The second term, we're beginning to see these transformative effects. My issue is they're not very well thought out. For example, GST has become a license to extort. Demonetization, I still don't know what the benefits were because there was no white paper on what expected results were and how that tallied up and things like that. But fine, whatever is happening, it's for the better for the time being. I will believe Shri Modi when I actually see Air India privatized. Till I see Air India privatized, I'm not willing to take his statements at face value. Uh, this is number one, because you need those economic reforms to start industrializing. It is already too late. We're probably already past the use by date. Our window of opportunity is very narrow, because once additive manufacturing, 3D manufacturing start coming about, the first people to get replaced will be the low end manufacturers like us.
Right.
The second wave, it's the medium end manufacturers like China that will get replaced. So
Right.
India will get hurt first. So our window is very, very small. Number one. Number two, just to go back to the point that you were making prior, about how gens didn't would normally not come together in things. This has been very, very problematic. And this, I'm building a bridge to the current point, which is narrative building, the idea of India. Indians have historically, for all those divisive things we have, there are mlechas, there are shudras, and things like that. We won't touch shudras, mlechas are polluted, foreigners stay away, and all of that. We've never had the two building blocks of a state, substance and salience. In spite of us having all these divisions, we can't say who is not an Indian and who is an Indian, and we don't know who we are. Substance is what connects us, salience is what divides us. Why are Vibhuti and Abhijit friends, and why are we not friends with Imran Khan? Vibhuti and Abhijit's friendship is substance. Why we are not friends with Imran Khan is salience. Indians have never had that. Have you ever thought of it? When Mahmud of Ghazni was coming and sacking the Somnath temple, which is one of the Jyotirlingas, that great Shiva Bhakta who built, Brihadeshwara temple and things like that, and Gangai Konda Chorapuram, uh, uh, Rajendra Chora, Rajendra Chora, is more interested in going and invading Southeast Asia than he is in protecting one of the Shiva's Jyotirlingas. So we have a very, very problematic history. That notion of Bharatavarsha as a united whole, it's it's never really been politically realized. And the problem with the current idea of India, and this is where it comes to why we're so bad at building narratives, the question you asked, is that our memory, our ideation of ourselves, is not based on a historical memory of a civilizational state. Even though the BJP and Hindutva talk about it, they've done absolutely zilch to enforce it in terms of education or the national idea and things like that, mostly to do with the fact that they haven't installed a new elite, and the language they speak is very good for lower level communication with ordinary people. It isn't at an intellectual level. It certainly isn't at a global intellectual level at all. um, and the point is, your entire ideation of yourself is from this one point in history: freedom struggle, Nehru, Gandhi. People tend to forget one point in history. America never identified itself by the independence struggle and by George Washington. It identified itself as the American dream, where we don't care where you're coming from, you aspire to this wonderful economic paradise of freedom and democracy. And see, that is a dream that transcends time. France is a linguistic creation. Germany is a linguistic creation, and language transcends time. Italy is a linguistic creation, and that transcends time. A family and loyalty to one point in history is not a transcendental idea. So you have the idea of India failing, and the BJP's biggest failure is that even though it has an alternative idea of India, it has too much of an inferiority complex, shame, shyness, I don't know what it is, to enforce it. It doesn't have the academic or intellectual heft to ram it through, and it hasn't created the elites, the replacement elites that are required to institutionalize it.
I think I totally agree with you that we haven't created the heft, the intellectual elitism, or the confidence, or I would even say the arrogance of the whole thing. Like that we need intellectual arrogance because we have everything out there in our texts, our literature, our history. We may be a 72-year young independent country, you know, But we have a history and tradition of over thousands and thousands of years, including texts and everything else, and we have forgotten that completely. And BJP has been never been in power. It's a post-independence era creation. As a result of which there is not enough intellectual heft in it to do something.
Unfortunately. And
Unfortunately,
you look at the giants who led up to, not maybe not directly RSS even, but linked to it. Say Savarkar or Hejewar and people like that. You read their works, they were great intellectual giants of their time. Rajaji, who the Swatantra Party, uh, huge intellectual giant of his time. You needed to have guts to take any of these people on in a face-to-face debate. But you come to the intellectual heft of the BJP today, it's laughable.
yeah,
I mean, I've seen school children more attuned to global debates, to global jargon, to global communication methodologies than the BJP is.
right.
And that's truly worrying because it turns out that after the last of the greats passed away in the 1960s, the BJP simply hasn't grown intellectually at all. They're trapped in a time warp of the 1960s and they've just ossified. It's like what my friend Sushant Sareen says about the zero in India, that, in 730 AD, we finally formally invented the zero. And we were so taken in by our invention that we collectively decide to reduce ourselves to zero.
That's the exact point. Like we have never had the confidence. We have never developed that confidence. And this is what I always say. I'm totally against and I dislike when people say that we have become like this because we have been ruled for thousands of years by the British and the invaders of all kinds that came. And I always say that, hey, that was a part of history. It is over. Get over it. Don't give an apology. Oh, हमने उन्होंने हमें मारा तो हम ऐसे हो गए. Get up, get ready. That's where I'm a believer in Abhijit. I always profess and I talk. I learn from sports. Sports teaches me a lot, and I say it's like what next. It's like every tennis player or every cricket batsman, when he gets a lucky reprieve or a catch dropped, he doesn't give a catch again to get out. Then you say, okay, now let me go and get my century. Likewise in tennis, your beautiful serve going outside, your opponent slams it down the line, you don't start crying. You say, okay, what next? We don't have the mentality of what next. We are not a sporting nation. We have never believed that we can come back and win. That's the mentality. I always say to people that India needs to install a performance based culture. That's something which I learned in America. The performance based culture comes from sports, it comes from the kids. When you fight to win a match, it is important. You don't win the match, chalo usko goal karne do yaar, usko na khush ho jayega. You don't get run out and the opponent doesn't tell you, chal batting kar le ek baar aur. We have to have that mentality. You are out. Now wait for your next turn to come. Unless and until we have the sportsman's culture, and that's where it is important. Like this
And
is
this
important.
is where, I disagree on the sportsman culture because I see it as a symptom, not as the cause. Something happens around 700 AD. I don't know what it is, around about 700 AD, maybe started about 400 AD. I suspect it's caste, which, sort of precludes um, group sports in that sense. Individual sports don't make a country. It's team
Right.
sports that
Team
make a
sport.
country because
Yeah.
that teaches you how to coordinate,
Right.
think for each other, compensate for each other and things
Mhm.
like that. Have you noticed that ever since caste starts solidifying in Indian literature, India's ability to be coherent also starts evaporating? I'm just marking correlation. I'm not claiming causation because I've, like the Vedanta philosophy, I'm still searching. I have not found. So if you find, let me know. Right now I'm in the process of neti. So you see this parallel process, number one. The second is this process is also accompanied by the demilitarization of India. People
Right.
tend to forget that India was an extremely violent, martial country. This concept of non-violence and things like that You had a very strict military code, which is you did not go around raping women, killing cities, pillage, plunder, and all of that, which was very much like Greek hoplite warfare. Greeks were ruthless on the battlefield, but you did not go around pillaging, plundering, slaughtering prisoners of war and things like that. But we remained a very militaristic society. What starts happening around 400 to 700 AD that you start eroding? Again, I personally think the issue is caste division solidifying. We don't know why that happens. Is it a result of, you know, the wave of feudalism you see? Because that period is when every empire in the West starts disintegrating. The Roman Empire disintegrates and Europe moves into feudalism. The Persian Empire, even though the empire doesn't disintegrate, the Sassanid Empire effectively fractalizes and becomes a feudal entity. And India also enters that stage of, feudalism and things like that. But in India, you develop the social structures which prevent your, social upliftment. In Sassanid Persia, you didn't see that. In Rome, you didn't see that. You could climb the ladder, like the Byzantine Empire shows you. You can climb the ladder reasonably well. In India, that doesn't happen. And you combine this with that story of Parashurama, killing all the Kshatriyas. I think it's a metaphor for something. I don't think we've studied it properly. But, there's no Kshatriya left in India because, as per mythology, Parashurama killed them all.
Right.
And that has some reasonable level of uh, truth to it, because what we also see is a lack of introspection, a lack of studying our own mistakes, a lack of studying one's own mistakes is the toughest thing one can do.
And the
It is
biggest
far
teacher
tougher.
in life is your own mistakes.
Exactly.
That's right.
We don't introspect. I was reading up the battles of Prithviraj Chauhan. He never learned from because he won the first battle of Tarain. He wasn't even interested in learning, how can we be better? He wins the first battle of Tarain through sheer dumb luck, right? Uh, he doesn't pursue it. He doesn't send, spies to Ghor to see what Muhammad Ghori is planning. Is there a second invasion coming? Is there a third invasion coming? What tactics are they changing and things like that? He does none of that. He's happy to rest on his laurels. And what then happens is Muhammad Ghor sits and analyzes where all he went wrong and how not to repeat it the second time over. Third part, there is a fort, I think Ludhiana or Bhatinda, that got captured by Ghori, which Prithviraj Chauhan wants captured back. It takes them one whole year to capture that fort back. And there is no analysis of why it took him so long, no introspection, nothing. And what then happens is when Ghori invades the second time in the second battle of Tarain, Ghori captures it in 2 weeks. What takes us one year to capture, they capture in 2 weeks. And I can just go on and on and on, because one of the things I'm looking at is cavalry and the use of cavalry in medieval warfare in India. Unfortunately, there's almost no sources because all our sources were written on palm leaves which disintegrate. We don't have stone or clay tablets and things which can preserve literature. I'm sure we took it down, but we don't preserve it. It's a history of an inferiority complex that seems to set in somewhere around 700, where we can't introspect at all. And we lose our ability to abstract, we lose our ability for macroing. Chinese were very good at practicals. Indians were very good at abstraction prior to the 700s. The Greeks, for example, they have 4 words for love: eros, philos, agape, storge. Okay, eros is what you feel when you watch a porn movie. Philos is the love you feel for your brother. Storge is the love you feel for a teacher or father. So above that, agape is the sort of platonic love. So they classify that very neatly. In India, there's this 16 types of love. There is the love you feel when you sleep with your wife. There is the love you feel when you sleep with another man's wife. There is the love when you sleep with the other man's wife's maid and things like that. So, we're fantastic at classifying the abstract. But when it comes to classifying the practical. So, for example, Garuda and Jatayu, eagle, vulture. What kind of eagle? Was it a golden eagle? Was it a fishing eagle? Was it a crested eagle? You have 17, 18 varieties of eagle. No, 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 Garuda, Garuda, Garuda. What kind of vulture was it? Was it a scavenger vulture? Was it a white-necked vulture? Was it a king vulture? What was it? Jatayu, Jatayu, सब कुछ Jatayu है, right? We have, so there is something that sets in, the scientific temperament starts going away. Our love of macro, 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 what we call, we don't get into micro analysis. And this philosophically, if you look at it, Indians tend to do macro analysis, but we start getting bad at macro analysis because macro analysis depends on very good micro analysis. The West
Absolutely.
Coast,
That's why the concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam
yeah,
sounds good, doesn't work.
exactly.
It sounds great, doesn't work, and that's what is important. Indians need to get out of the mentality. What I say is, everybody says common sense, common sense. I was reading a book and it talks about uncommon sense and common nonsense. Approaching that, we live in the world of common nonsense a lot, and we have to get out of that entire scenario. However, you talked about the medieval time, and I'm reminded of a recent comment by Salman Rushdie, Farid Zakaria attacking Hindus. Hindus have become a happy hunting ground for everybody. I use that phrase, happy hunting ground, although happy is not about happiness, but a happy hunting ground for others. Even Salman Rushdie, the man who has been ostracized, has a fatwa on his head, has the goal or the intellectual wisdom to comment upon that India under Modi is shifting to medieval era. What are your thought on that? And it's so bizarre. And Farid Zakaria, I think he suffers from my favorite phrase. He suffers from serious case of educated incapacity. Like he doesn't know what he's talking about. Your thoughts on these two?
I think to understand Farid Zakaria, you have to understand his father, who was one of the most rabidly communal politicians of modern India under Indira Gandhi. Don't forget that. So, for all that patina of sophistication he has, understand where he comes from, the background he comes from. He might have tried his best to whitewash his past and to, present this picture of this facade of liberal American moderation. But ultimately, you can never disown your parents. You can never disown your upbringing. You can't, set it aside completely and have a reset button. The second issue is we have to understand this entire wokeness uh, malady that's afflicting the United States. There's two sets of people. One are the mobs, and the second are the mob inciters. The mob inciters, who are the West Coast tech giants, are very smart people, right? Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg, they're smart as hell. It's just that they know that the remaining 99% of us are, to quote that amazing Indian word, Hindi came up with the word for woke much before the word woke was coined. And I think the Hindi term for woke is chutia. So, they think the remaining 99% of the population are chutias who need to be controlled. And this is a fantastic new form of mind control. Creates so much social upheaval that nobody thinks of controlling the power of the new tech nobility. And in that sense, it's exactly like medieval Europe, where the barons, to undermine central power and the power of the king, used to create massive internal strife. Right? This is what the West Coast tech barons do. On the East Coast, you have the inbred, decrepit remains of the East Coast, of the former East Coast elite, who are fundamentally morons who drink their own Kool-Aid, to use that Americanism. So you have the West Coast smart manipulators, you have the East Coast trust fund morons. And in between, you have the remaining 99% of the population, which is up for grabs, which is up for manipulation, which is it's the petri dish in which you create the social churn so that everybody can prosper. And Farid Zakaria, I would, it really depends on which point of view you come from. I personally think Salman Rushdie belongs to the West Coast elite because he realizes he's got a good thing going for him. He needs to be in with the times at a time when, Islam was the biggest enemy of the West, radical Islam, and Ayatollah Khomeini was the biggest radical enemy of the West, he managed to profit from it with millions. He turned his crisis into a multi-million dollar opportunity. And today, when Hinduism is emerging as the new beating boy of the West, he's managed to monetize that as well. I would say he's very much that West Coast. Fareed Zakaria reminds me of the East Coast, the trust fund morons. He comes from privilege. He comes from a absolutely seedy, manipulative, low class family that made a lot of money very quickly. And he's that social climber that needs to, mouth off all these politically correct inanities and go with the Weltanschauung of the period to find his social acceptance. So, congratulations to him. If it's good for him, Fareed, do what's good for you. Do what's good for your bank balance. Um, but I suspect, like your father, you don't have a moral compass. It's a great big moral vacuum.
Oh, that's truly awesome. And this is I always wonder what brings us together because from the function of the mind, I think I connect with you, even if you don't may not connect with me, may or may not. And I always say this, I draw the lesson, my life lessons. Sometimes you have to rely upon something to teach you. Who is my guru? My father was a guru from a Yajñopavit point of view, and I love the man, and I would want him to be my father any times I'm reborn. But the point which in my Punarjanam, but I learned my life lessons from sports. And you very rightly said, cultures don't get established by individual sports, it's by team. And I always tell people that Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, Indian cricket team, even Virat Kohli was absent because of his family reasons. Hey, Indian team rose up to beat the Aussies back in their own yard. And we did the same thing in India to England, that they have forgotten that test match need not be a 5-day affair, it can be a 3-day affair. So the point of the matter remains is that sports is my biggest teacher. And it installs two things in it. One is you will not win all the time. You will lose. Your best of efforts may fail. As they say in sports teams, that any given Sunday, any team can beat anybody. It's all about a dropped catch or an unlucky run out or a missed penalty in soccer or whatever. You learn a lesson. You rise up. You exactly what you said. You learn from your mistakes and move on next. That's what is important, and India needs that. We need to install a sporting culture in schools and colleges where the winning becomes a part of our mentality. It's all about the factor that you talked about. We don't have a winning mentality. I will end this conversation. Every wonderful conversation must come to an end with what a senator once told me. We love you, Indians, as immigrants to this country. You are professionals. You are hardworking. You are in the highest median income. You have family values. You take care of your children. You are least problem on a law and order front, and you ask for nothing. We haven't learned the art of asking for anything. So I'm very delighted to have you on the show today. Viewers must have enjoyed your unique inputs and your unique thinking that you brought to the whole thing. You are not for no reason a great mind, a geopolitical thinker, and a strategist. So, with these words, friends, have a great weekend, a great week ahead. See you next week. Thank you, Abhijit, for taking time to join me today.